The wooden gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the cramped courthouse like thunder before a desert storm. Judge Blackwood's eyes, cold as winter steel, swept across the packed room before settling on the young woman standing before him. "Miss Evelyn Monroe," he drawled, savoring each syllable like tobacco juice. "This court finds your living arrangements unseemly for an unmarried woman of your age." Evelyn's jaw tightened. 23 years old, orphaned just 2 months prior when her father, Judge Theodore Monroe, had been found dead at his desk heart failure. They'd said she'd buried him in the red dirt cemetery at the edge of Dustwater, Arizona territory, beneath a sky so vast it made her grief seem small. Now she stood accused of nothing more than existing without a man's protection. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My father left me that property. I've done nothing improper." "Nothing improper." Blackwood's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile on a more pleasant face. "Living alone, refusing proper suitors, conducting yourself like some frontier harlot." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Abigail Henderson, the banker's wife, fanned herself dramatically. Tom Garrett, who'd proposed twice and been refused both times, smirked from the gallery. "I've broken no law," Evelyn insisted, her green eyes flashing with the same fire that had gotten her father in trouble more than once. He'd been the only judge in 3 counties who'd ruled against the powerful when justice demanded it. Maybe that's why his heart had given out so suddenly. Or maybe— "The law," Blackwood interrupted, "is whatever this court says it is. And this court says a woman living alone, especially one as spirited as yourself, presents a moral danger to our community." The afternoon sun slanted through the dirty windows, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny spirits. And somewhere outside, a horse whinnied nervously. The smell of sweat, leather, and fear hung thick in the air. "You have 2 choices, Miss Monroe. Accept the court sentence of 6 months corrective labor at the Yuma Territorial Prison." Evelyn's breath caught. Yuma, where they sent the worst criminals to break rocks under the killing sun, where women went in defiant and came out broken, if they came out at all. Or, Blackwood continued, his voice oily with false magnanimity, "choose a husband from among the men present and marry immediately. Today, here and now." The room erupted. Men straightened their collars, some stepping forward eagerly. Tom Garrett was already pushing through the crowd, that hungry look in his eyes that had always made Evelyn's skin crawl. Behind him, others jostled for position: the butcher with his blood-stained apron, the saloon keeper who reeked of whiskey even at noon, men who saw her not as a person, but as property to be claimed. Evelyn's gaze swept the room desperately. These men who tipped their hats to her father now circled like vultures. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the reality of her situation crystallized. This wasn't about propriety or protection. This was about her father's small ranch with its water rights, about the silver deposit he'd discovered but never reported, about silencing the last Monroe who might ask uncomfortable questions about his death. "Well, Miss Monroe," Blackwood's voice cut through the noise, "time's wasting. Choose, or I'll choose for you." That's when she saw him. He sat in the corner where they kept the condemned, wrists bound in iron shackles that clinked softly when he shifted. Luke Callahan. She'd seen him brought in 3 days ago, dust-covered and bleeding from a bullet graze across his temple. The whispers said he'd killed a man in Tucson, that he was waiting transport to hang. But there was something in his eyes gray like storm clouds over the desert that spoke of depths the gossips couldn't fathom. He wasn't looking at her like the others, wasn't measuring her curves or calculating her worth. He was simply watching, as if he recognized something in her desperation that echoed in his own condemned soul. "Time's up," Blackwood announced. "Deputy Martinez, prepare the transport papers for Yuma." "Him?" The word left Evelyn's lips before her mind could catch up. She pointed a steady finger at Luke Callahan. I choose him. The silence that followed was complete. Even the flies stopped buzzing. Luke's eyes widened slightly, the first emotion she'd seen cross his weathered face. You can't be serious, Tom Garrett spluttered. He's a killer. He's set to hang. The lady's made her choice, Luke said quietly. His voice rough as sandpaper, but not unkind. Though I'd advise her to reconsider. Absolutely not. Blackwood's face flushed purple. This court will not— You said any man present, Evelyn interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. You didn't specify he had to be free or respectable or even willing. She met Luke's gaze across the room. The law is whatever this court says it is. Remember, so what does the court say now? Blackwood's jaw worked like he was chewing nails. He'd been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. The crowd held its breath, waiting. To refuse now would expose the charade, would make clear this was never about protecting her, but about controlling her. Marshal Dixon! Blackwood finally ground out. Will transport papers still be necessary for Mr. Callahan? Marshal Samuel Dixon, a lean man with kind eyes who'd known Evelyn's father, stepped forward reluctantly. Well, Judge, if they're married, and if she takes responsibility for him. Like hell, Tom Garrett surged forward. You can't let her throw herself away on condemned trash. Luke stood slowly, the chains making him awkward but not diminishing his presence. He was taller than she'd realized, broader through the shoulders. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and there was a day's worth of stubble on his jaw. But it was his eyes that held her gray and deep and terribly, terribly sad. The lady should choose someone else, he said quietly. I've got no future to offer. Just a past full of blood and a date with the hangman. Then we match perfectly, Evelyn replied, lifting her chin. I seem to have no future either, just a past full of questions and a date with Yuma. At least this way. We choose our fate. Judge Blackwood slammed his gavel again. Very well, Marshal Dixon. Unshackle the prisoner temporarily. Reverend Walsh, perform the ceremony. Now. The next minutes passed in a blur. Reverend Walsh, a nervous man who sweated through his collar, stumbled through the vows. Luke's hands were steady when they released him from the shackles, though he rubbed his wrists where the iron had left marks. He stood beside Evelyn, careful not to touch her, while the crowd pressed in around them like wolves. Do you, Evelyn Marie Monroe, take this man? I do, she cut through the ceremony, eager to end this spectacle. The Reverend blinked, flustered. And do you, Lucas James Callahan? Luke, he corrected quietly. Just Luke, and yeah, I do. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you married. God have mercy on your souls. No kiss sealed their union. No rice thrown in celebration. Just the scratch of the marshal's pen on paper and Blackwood's voice, dripping with venom. You've made your bed, Mrs. Callahan. Now you'll lie in it. Marshal, escort them to the old Stewart place. They'll serve a trial period there 6 months. If either fails to uphold this arrangement, both will face the original sentences. As they were led from the courthouse, Evelyn caught a glimpse of her reflection in a window. Her honey-brown hair had come loose from its pins, framing a face that looked older than it had this morning. Behind her, Luke's reflection loomed dangerous, unknown, but somehow less threatening than the supposedly respectable men she'd left behind. Why? He asked quietly as they stepped into the blazing afternoon sun. You don't know me. Don't know what I've done. No, Evelyn agreed, squinting against the light. But I know what they would have done to me, and I'd rather face an honest killer than dishonest gentlemen. Luke made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so bitter. Honest, that's a word I haven't heard applied to me in a long time. They were loaded onto a wagon, sitting carefully apart on the wooden bench. As dust water fell away behind them and the desert opened up ahead, vast and unforgiving and beautiful, Evelyn wondered if she just saved herself or signed her own death warrant. The Virgin's eyes met his by the river. The town gossips would say later, painting the story in shades of scandal, but there had been no river, just a courtroom thick with hypocrisy. And if her heart had surrendered, it wasn't to the man beside her, but to the wild hope that somewhere in this vast territory, two damaged souls might find something worth surviving for. The sun beat down mercilessly as they rode toward their exile, toward a marriage built on desperation, toward whatever waited in the shadow of the mountains. And despite everything, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced since her father died, the fierce, terrible freedom of having nothing left to lose. The wagon lurched to a stop, dust swirling around them like spirits disturbed from their rest. Marshal Dixon set the brake and gestured toward what might generously be called a structure. The old Stuart place squatted against the landscape like something the desert had chewed up and spat back out. "Home, sweet home," Dixon muttered, not quite meeting their eyes. "Place has been empty near 3 years since the Stuarts gave up and headed back east." Luke climbed down first, his movements careful, controlled. He didn't offer Evelyn his hand, whether from respect or indifference. She couldn't tell. She gathered her skirts and descended on her own, her boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a finality that echoed in her chest. The house, if it could be called that, was adobe brick and rotting timber, with a roof that sagged like a broken spirit. The wooden fence lay in pieces, scattered like bones. Tumbleweeds had claimed the porch, and the door hung askew on one hinge, revealing darkness within that seemed to swallow the late afternoon light. "There's a well out back," Dixon said, unloading a single crate of provisions from the wagon, the court's meager wedding gift. "Might still have water, might not. You'll need to clear the sand out either way." "How generous," Luke said dryly. "Blackwood thinks of everything." Dixon's weathered face tightened. He'd been a friend of Theodore Monroe, had spoken kindly at the funeral. Now he looked like he'd aged 10 years in an afternoon. "Miss Evelyn Mrs. Callahan, your father would have wanted—" "My father's dead," Evelyn said quietly. "What he would have wanted died with him." The marshal nodded slowly, then climbed back onto the wagon. "I'll check in weekly. Try to—" He trailed off, looking between them the condemned man and the judge's daughter, married strangers in the middle of nowhere. Just try to survive. They watched the wagon disappear into the heat shimmer, taking with it their last connection to civilization. The silence that followed was complete save for the whisper of wind through broken boards. "Well," Luke said finally, "might as well see what we're working with." The inside was worse than the outside. Sand had blown in through gaps in the walls, forming small dunes in the corners. The iron stove was rusted, the chimney probably blocked. Broken furniture lay scattered like casualties of some forgotten battle. In what might have been a bedroom, a mattress showed evidence of becoming home to various desert creatures. "Paradise?" Evelyn murmured, fighting the urge to cry. This morning she'd awakened in her father's house, in a real bed with clean sheets. Now. "Could be worse," Luke said, testing the sturdiness of a wooden chair before setting it upright. "Least the walls are mostly standing, and that's good thick adobe keeps the heat out during the day, holds it at night." She looked at him sharply. "You sound like you've done this before." "Fixed up a place or two." He didn't elaborate, moving to inspect the stove. "This'll need cleaning, but the iron's solid. Good Kansas City steel. They built things to last back then." They worked in silence as the sun sank lower, each claiming their own tasks without discussion. Luke hauled the mattress outside and set it ablaze, the smoke carrying away whatever had nested there. Evelyn found a broken broom and began the Sisyphean task of sweeping sand from a dirt floor. The physical labor was almost a relief. It gave her something to focus on, besides the absurdity of her situation married to a man whose last name she'd learned only hours ago. exiled to a dead homestead with a week's worth of food and no clear plan for survival. "There's a lean-to out back," Luke reported, returning with an armload of somewhat serviceable timber. "Looks like someone started building a chicken coop. Might be we can salvage some of this wood for repairs." The word slipped out before she could stop it. He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the dying light. "Figure of speech. This is your show, Mrs. Callahan? I'm just along for the ride until they decide to string me up after all." "Stop that!" She didn't know where the sharpness in her voice came from. "Stop acting like you're already dead. It doesn't help anyone. Doesn't hurt anyone either." But he came inside, setting the wood down carefully. "You always this optimistic, or is it special for me? My father used to say that despair was just laziness dressed up fancy." The words brought a fresh wave of grief. Of course, he also said the law would protect the innocent, so perhaps he wasn't the wisest man. Theodore Monroe was a good judge. Luke said quietly, "Fair. Not many of those around." She turned, surprised. "You knew him." "Knew of him. He presided over a case few years back friend of mine accused of rustling. Your father actually listened to the evidence instead of just taking the big rancher's word. Man walked free because of him." "And where's your friend now?" Luke's jaw tightened. "Dead anyway, but he died a free man instead of at the end of a rope. That meant something." Night fell like a curtain dropping, sudden and complete as it does in the desert. They'd managed to clear most of the main room and gather enough broken furniture to start a fire in the stove once they cleaned it. By the light of a single kerosene lamp, miraculously unbroken, they took inventory of their supplies. Flour, beans, salt pork. Evelyn listed. Coffee, some canned peaches, probably from before the war, and she held up a small cloth bag. Seeds, corn, squash, beans. Someone's idea of a joke. Luke said, "Takes water to grow things. More water than we're likely to have." "We'll see about that." She set the seeds aside carefully. "Tomorrow we clear the well." "Tomorrow you point and I clear the well," he corrected. "Unless you've got experience with cave-ins and scorpions, I can learn." "Not on my watch." The words came out harder than he'd perhaps intended. He rubbed his face, exhaustion showing in the lines around his eyes. "Look, we need to set some ground rules here. This arrangement, whatever it is, I don't expect anything from you. You saved us both from worse fates. And I'm grateful. But you don't owe me anything beyond that." "Ground rules," Evelyn repeated. "All right, here are mine. We work together or we die separately. I didn't choose you as some kind of hired hand. Mr. Callahan, I chose you because every other man in that room looked at me like property to be owned. You were the only one who looked at me like a person making a terrible decision." "Which you did." "Which we both did." She stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "I'll take the east corner. You can have the west. There's enough broken furniture to build a privacy screen of sorts." "And if I turn out to be the killer they say I am?" She met his gaze steadily. "Then I suppose I'll die knowing I was a better judge of character than my father, but I don't think I am." They fashioned makeshift beds from what they could salvage horse blankets found in the lean-to, bundled cloth for pillows. The privacy screen was more gesture than barrier, but it established boundaries in a boundary-less situation. As Evelyn settled onto her pallet, she could hear Luke moving on the other side, the careful sounds of a man trying not to disturb. "The man you killed," she said into the darkness. "Did he deserve it?" A long silence. Then, "He thought so, right up until he didn't." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." She pulled the rough blanket higher, shivering as the desert night stole away the day's warmth. Through a gap in the roof, stars gleamed like chips of ice, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled lonely sound for a lonely place. "My father's death," she said quietly. "They said it was his heart, but he was strong as an ox, never sick a day in his life. And the night before he died, He told me he'd found something. Evidence, he said, about Blackwood and the railroad company and the dead homesteaders out by Skeleton Ridge. The darkness seemed to press closer. You think Blackwood killed him? I think my father's the third judge to die of natural causes in 2 years. All of them were investigating the same land grants. She laughed bitterly. And now here I am, married to a condemned man on a dead homestead, where no one would question it if we both just disappeared. Well, Luke said after a moment, least now I know why you picked me. Figured you might survive longer with a killer than without one. Is that what you are, a killer? Another silence. Longer this time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, rougher, like words dragged over broken glass. We're all killers. Mrs. Callahan. Some of us are just more honest about it. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of dreams. Evelyn woke once to the sound of Luke moving, saw his silhouette by the door, keeping watch like a guardian or a prisoner, she couldn't tell which. The wedding ring on her finger caught the moonlight, a cheap brass band that would turn her skin green by morning. She twisted it absently, this symbol of a union that was no union, a marriage that was merely survival dressed up in ceremony. Tomorrow they would clear the well, shore up the walls, make this death trap somehow livable. Tomorrow they would begin the charade that might keep them both alive for 6 more months. But tonight, in the darkness of their exile, they were just 2 damaged people sharing a broken shelter, each nursing wounds the other couldn't see. The desert winds sang through the gaps in the walls, and if it sounded like mourning, neither of them mentioned it. Some truths were better left unspoken, at least until the sun came up and made liars of them all. The rattle came just as Evelyn reached for the water bucket, a sound like dried bones shaking in a leather pouch. She froze, her hands suspended in midair, as the diamondback coiled beside the well, its scales catching the morning sun like coins of death. Don't move. Luke's voice was low, steady, coming from somewhere behind her. Don't even breathe hard. The snake's head swayed, tasting the air with its forked tongue. Evelyn's heart hammered so loud she was certain the creature could hear it. Sweat trickled down her spine despite the early hour's coolness. This was it, she thought. Survived Blackwood's mockery of justice, only to die 3 days later from a snake bite. She heard Luke's footsteps, slow and deliberate, from the corner of her eye. She saw him moving with a predator's grace, a long-handled shovel in his hands. The snake's attention shifted, its rattle intensifying. Easy now, Luke murmured, though whether he was talking to her or the snake, Evelyn couldn't tell. Nobody needs to die this morning. The strike came fast as lightning, but Luke was faster. The shovel blade caught the snake mid-lunge, sending it flying into the brush. He stepped between Evelyn and where it had landed, watching until he was certain it had retreated. You can breathe now, he said, lowering the shovel. Evelyn's legs gave out. She sat hard on the packed earth, gasping like she'd run from dust water. Her hands shook as she pressed them against the ground, trying to steady herself. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me yet. Luke crouched beside the well, peering into its depths. Where there's one, there's usually more. Desert rats know water attracts everything, including things with fangs. He was right. They found 2 more rattlers over the next hour, nested in the cool shadows around the well's base. Luke dispatched them with the same calm efficiency, while Evelyn learned to move with careful deliberation, checking every shadow twice. You're handy with that shovel, she observed, watching him skin one of the snakes. Waste not, want not. Snake meat's not half bad if you're hungry enough. Were you hungry enough? He glanced up at her, those storm-gray eyes unreadable. There was a time I'd have eaten the leather off my boots if it had salt on it. They worked through the morning clearing the well, Luke descending on a rope they'd fashioned from torn blankets, while Evelyn hauled up bucket after bucket of sand and debris. She could hear him coughing in the depths, the sound echoing like a ghost's lament. Found water, he called up finally. "Murky, but it's there. Toss down the lamp." She lowered the kerosene lamp carefully. In its flickering light, she could just make out his form at the bottom. Knee-deep in muddy water, he worked for another hour, clearing rocks and sand, checking the walls for stability. When he finally climbed out, he was soaked and filthy but triumphant. "Give it a day to settle and we'll have drinking water," he said, wringing out his shirt. Not clean, but better than dying of thirst. Evelyn found herself staring at the scars across his back, old ones, white and ropey, crisscrossing his skin like a map of violence. He noticed her looking and pulled his wet shirt back on despite the heat. "Railroad camp," he said simply. "Guards had whips. I had opinions about working conditions. Bad combination." "Is that why you—" She stopped herself. "Why I killed a man," he laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No, that came later. Different story, different ghost." They ate snake meat for lunch, roasted over a fire Luke built in a circle of stones. It was tougher than anything Evelyn had eaten before, but she was too hungry to care. The desert was teaching her that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Storm coming," Luke said, studying the horizon where dark clouds massed like an army. "Monsoon season starting early. We need to shore up that roof before it hits." They worked with desperate efficiency. Luke on the roof, patching holes with whatever they could find, tin from old cans, hammered flat. Boards from the broken chicken coop, even packed mud. Evelyn handed up materials, learning quickly which size nails he needed before he asked. The wind picked up as afternoon wore on, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rolled across the desert like God clearing his throat. "Get inside," Luke ordered as the first fat raindrops fell. "This is going to be bad." It was worse than bad. The storm hit like a fist. Rain driving horizontal. Wind screaming through every gap they hadn't managed to seal. Water poured through the remaining holes in the roof, turning their floor into mud. Lightning struck so close they could smell the burn of it. "The east wall!" Evelyn shouted over the storm's roar. The adobe was crumbling under the rain's assault. Decades-old mud brick dissolving like sugar. Luke grabbed the shovel, his universal tool, apparently, and began packing dirt and debris against the failing wall. Evelyn joined him, using a broken board to push mud into the gaps. The work was futile as trying to bail the ocean with a teacup, but they kept at it, fighting the storm's fury with stubborn determination. That's when they heard a groaning, tearing sound from above. Luke looked up just as a section of roof beam, weakened by rot and rain, broke free. "Look out!" He lunged forward, shoving Evelyn aside as the beam crashed down where she'd been standing. It caught him across the shoulder, driving him to his knees. "Luke," she scrambled to him, rain plastering her hair to her face. Blood seeped through his shirt where the beam had torn skin. "I'm fine," he grunted, though his face was gray with pain. "Just need to—" Another section of roof gave way. This time they both dove for cover, ending up pressed against the one solid wall, Luke's body shielding hers as debris rained down. She could feel him shaking from cold, pain, or adrenaline. She couldn't tell. The storm raged for hours, or maybe minutes, time lost meaning in the chaos. When it finally passed, moving on to terrorize other parts of the desert, they surveyed the damage in stunned silence. Half the roof was gone. The east wall was more gap than structure. Everything they owned was soaked. "So much for home improvement," Luke said, cradling his injured shoulder. Evelyn laughed, actually laughed at the absurdity of it all. Once she started, she couldn't stop, hysteria bubbling up like water from their muddy well. She laughed until she cried. And then she just cried. All the grief and fear and anger of the past days pouring out like the storm. Luke didn't try to comfort her. He just sat there in the mud beside her, letting her cry it out. When she finally stopped, embarrassed by her breakdown, he handed her a relatively clean corner of his shirt to wipe her face. "Feel better?" No, she hiccuped. Maybe, I don't know. Fair enough. He struggled to his feet, grimacing. Come on, let's see what we can salvage before dark. They worked by lamplight, creating a small dry space in the least damaged corner. The seeds Evelyn had so carefully saved were soaked but not ruined. The flour was partially saved, though they'd have to use it quickly before it molded. Luke's shoulder was worse than he'd let on she could see him favoring it, though he said nothing. Let me look at that, she insisted as they huddled in their makeshift shelter. It's nothing. It's something, and if it gets infected out here, you'll die. Then where will I be? She tried for lightness, but couldn't quite manage it. He submitted to her ministrations with poor grace, sitting still as she cleaned the wound with their precious water and tore strips from her petticoat for bandages. His skin was hot under her fingers, scattered with more scars she didn't ask about. You're burning up, she said, alarmed. Just the day's heat. I run warm. But by midnight, he was shivering despite the blankets she'd piled on him. Fever had set in, whether from the wound or exposure or sheer exhaustion. She couldn't tell. She sat beside him, wiping his face with a damp cloth, listening to him mutter in his delirium. Sarah, he said once, clearly, I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Shh, Evelyn murmured, though he couldn't hear her. It's all right. Had to protect them. Had to, but I was too late. Always too late. She stayed with him through the night, keeping the fever at bay as best she could with cool cloths and sheer will. When dawn came, pale and tentative after the storm's violence, Luke's fever had broken. He woke to find her still beside him, dark circles under her eyes. You stayed, he said, voice rough. Where would I go? She tried to make it sound practical, but something in her voice gave her away. He caught her hand as she reached to check his forehead. For a moment they stayed frozen like that, his calloused fingers wrapped around hers. Then he let go, turning away. Thank you, he said to the wall. Don't thank me yet, she echoed his words from days before. We still have to survive 6 more months. 5 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days, he corrected. But who's counting? They both were. But as Evelyn looked around their ruined shelter, at the man who'd saved her from a snake and a falling beam, who'd fevered through the night with ghosts she didn't understand, she wondered if surviving was really the hard part. The hard part might be pretending this was just about survival when something else was taking root in the ruins, fragile as her waterlogged seeds, but just as stubbornly determined to grow. Outside, the desert steamed under the rising sun. Yesterday's storm already a memory, but the well was full of water now, muddy but real. And if they could survive rattlesnakes and monsoons and the fever that comes after, maybe they could survive whatever else the desert and Judge Blackwood had planned for them. Luke was already up, testing his shoulder, ready to face another day's work. Watching him, Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. Not love, it was too soon, too strange for that. But perhaps the possibility of it, perhaps that was enough to build on, like a house on sand, hoping the foundation would hold. The river appeared like a miracle after another storm, a muddy artery cutting through the desert where before there had been only dry sand. It ran 50 yards from their makeshift home, brown and swift with runoff from the mountains. Evelyn discovered it while gathering prickly pear pads, their meager supplement to dwindling supplies. Luke, she called, her voice carrying on the evening wind. Come see. He emerged from the house where he'd been reinforcing the walls, shirt damp with sweat, the healing wound on his shoulder still making him move carefully. When he saw the water, something shifted in his expression, a softening she'd noticed more often lately. Flash flood brought it down from the high country, he said, kneeling at the bank. Won't last more than a few days, maybe a week if we're lucky. Then we'd better make use of it. Evelyn was already planning washing, water storage, maybe even those seeds if they worked fast. But when she turned to share her thoughts, she found Luke watching her with an odd expression. "What?" "Nothing, just—" He shook his head. "You're different than I expected." "How so?" "Most town-bred ladies would have given up by now. Demanded to be taken back. Consequences be damned." "I'm not most ladies." She meant it to sound defiant, but it came out softer than intended. "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." They worked until sunset, hauling water and everything that would hold it, buckets, pots, even an old whiskey bottle Luke had found buried behind the house. As darkness fell, they sat by the river, too exhausted to move. The moon rose full and bright, turning the water to molten silver. "It's almost beautiful," Evelyn murmured, hugging her knees. "If you forget where we are, why we're here." "Beauty's where you find it." Luke skipped a stone across the water. "Even in prison, men would talk about sunrise through the bars, like it was the finest thing they'd ever seen." "Is that where you learned to survive prison?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, railroad camp first, prison second, the war before that. Been surviving one way or another since I was 15. The war. She knew he meant the conflict between the states, though it had ended over a decade ago. Which side? "Does it matter? Boys killing boys. All of us too young to understand what we were dying for. I was with the Union, but only because they got to me first." He threw another stone. Harder this time. "Learned real quick that the color of your uniform didn't make you righteous. Just made you a target." The pain in his voice made her chest tight. Without thinking, she reached over and touched his hand where it rested on the ground. He went very still. "I'm sorry," she said, "for whatever you lost." He turned his hand palm up, let their fingers intertwine briefly before pulling away. "We all lost something in that war. Some of us just lost it more slowly." A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The night sounds of the desert rose around them, mysterious, threatening, but somehow less frightening than they'd been weeks ago. She was adapting, Evelyn realized, becoming something harder. Maybe, or maybe just finding the strength that had always been there. "Tell me about her," she said suddenly. "Sarah." Luke's whole body tensed. "How do you—" "You called for her during the fever." He stood abruptly, walked to the water's edge. For a moment she thought he'd leave, stride off into the darkness rather than answer. But he just stood there, shoulders rigid with memory. "My wife," he said finally. "Sarah was my wife. Had a daughter too, Emma, 4 years old. Light of my life." His voice cracked on the last word. Evelyn waited, knowing this was like lancing a wound, painful but necessary. "After the war, I hired on with the railroad, trying to build something instead of tear it down. But the camps were hellmen dying from heat, from accidents, from each other. When I spoke up, tried to organize better conditions, they blacklisted me. Couldn't find work anywhere." He picked up another stone, turned it over in his fingers. "Took a job writing security for a freight company. Supposed to be easy money. But the man who hired me, Calvin Marsh, he was using the wagons to smuggle guns to raiders. When I found out, I tried to quit. That's when he told me he knew where my family lived. Said if I didn't keep quiet." The stone flew from his hand, disappearing into the dark water. "I kept quiet. God help me. I kept quiet. But it didn't matter. Marsh decided I was a liability anyway. Sent his men while I was on a run to Prescott. By the time I got back—" He didn't need to finish. Evelyn could see it in the way his shoulders bowed, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. "You killed him," she said, not a question. "Not then. I buried my family first. Sarah in her Sunday dress, Emma with her doll. Then I rode to Tucson, walked into Marsh's office, and shot him between the eyes. Didn't run, didn't hide, just sat there waiting for the law." A bitter laugh. "Except Marsh had friends, powerful ones. They painted me as a disgruntled employee, A killer who murdered his boss over wages. Nobody mentioned the graves outside Prescott. The river gurgled and whispered, carrying secrets to the sea. Evelyn rose, moved to stand beside him. "I'm sorry," she said again, knowing how inadequate the words were. "You asked why I told you to choose someone else that day in court. Now you know, I'm poison. Evelyn, everything I touch dies. I'm still here. For now." She touched his arm, felt the tension thrumming through him like a guitar string wound too tight. "Luke, look at me." He turned reluctantly. In the moonlight, his eyes were silver, haunted, but something else too, something that made her breath catch. "We're both here," she said. "Both broken by loss, both exiled by men who abuse their power. But we're surviving. Maybe that means something. Maybe it means we're too stubborn to die. Maybe—" She didn't move away, stayed close enough to feel the heat radiating from him. "Or maybe it means we're supposed to live." The moment stretched between them, fragile as spider silk. Then Luke lifted his hand, brushed a strand of hair from her face with infinite gentleness. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, Sarah was dark where you're fair, but the strength, the way you don't quit even when quitting would be easier." "Is that why you saved me from the snake, the beam?" "No." His thumb traced her cheekbone, leaving fire in its wake. "I saved you because the thought of you dying makes me feel like I'm drowning, and I've been drowning long enough." The virgin's eyes met his by the river. Her heart surrendered when his hands did too. The words from some penny novel floated through her mind as Luke cupped her face, as she leaned into his touch like a flower toward sun. This was the moment those breathless stories always described, when desire overwhelmed sense, when propriety crumbled like ancient adobe. But this was real, not fiction. The hands that held her so gently had killed a man. The lips now inches from hers had spoken another woman's name in fever dreams. And yet, Evelyn. Her name was a prayer, a warning, a question all at once. "I know," she whispered. "I know all the reasons this is foolish, but I'm tired of being wise." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like she'd imagined. Not gentle, not tentative, but desperate, like a man gulping water after days in the desert. His hands tangled in her hair, and she clutched his shirt, anchoring herself as the world tilted. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "This doesn't change anything. I'm still condemned. You're still—" "I'm still your wife," she finished. "Legal if not real." "Is that what you think, that this isn't real?" His voice was rough as sandpaper. "Because it's the most real thing I've felt in 2 years." They stood there by the river, holding each other in the moonlight while the water sang its temporary song. Neither spoke of love too soon for that, too dangerous. But something had shifted between them, fundamental as the earth moving beneath their feet. "We should go back," Evelyn said eventually, though she made no move to leave his arms. "We should." Another long moment passed. Then Luke stepped back, but caught her hand, lacing their fingers together. They walked back to their broken home like that, connected by that simple touch that somehow said everything words couldn't. Inside, they went to their separate corners as always, but the awareness was different now. Charged with possibility and fear in equal measure, through the makeshift privacy screen. Evelyn could hear Luke settling for the night, every movement familiar now after weeks of shared space. "Luke, yeah, what you said about being poison, you're wrong." She stared at the stars through the gaps in their roof. "You're not poison. You're just wounded. There's a difference." His voice came soft through the darkness. "What if I don't know how to be anything else anymore? Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time." She heard him shift, maybe turning to face the screen that separated them. "Evelyn Monroe Callahan, you might be the death of me yet." "Not if I can help it," she promised, and meant it. Outside, the river ran on, carrying mountain snow to distant seas. By morning it might be lower, might disappear entirely back into the thirsty sand. But for now it flowed, proof that even in the desert, water could find a way. And if water could, perhaps two damaged souls could too. They slept better that night than they had since arriving, the sound of running water like a lullaby. And if their dreams were full of moonlight and gentle hands and kisses that tasted of sorrow and hope combined, well, the desert kept its secrets. It had learned, over the eons, that some truths were too tender for the harsh light of day. Marshal Dixon's weekly visit brought more than supplies. It brought news that made Luke's hand drift to where his gun should be. "Josiah Crane's in the territory," Dixon said, unloading flour from his wagon. "Thought you should know." Evelyn saw Luke go still. That perfect stillness she'd learned meant danger. "Who's Josiah Crane?" "Bounty hunter," Dixon answered when Luke didn't. "Best tracker between here and California. Never lost a quarry." He glanced at Luke. "Word is Blackwood's put up private money. $500 for anyone who brings you in dead or alive." "That's not legal," Evelyn protested. "Luke's serving his sentence here, with me." "Legal's got nothing to do with it." Luke's voice was flat. "Not when there's money involved." Dixon set down the last crate harder than necessary. "I'm doing what I can, but my jurisdiction only goes so far. Maybe you folks should think about running." Luke laughed bitterly. "Where would we go? Marshall, Mexico, California. A condemned man and a judge's daughter. We wouldn't make it 10 miles. "Then what will you do?" Evelyn demanded. "What I've always done, survive." But the look in his eyes said he wasn't sure that was possible this time. After Dixon left, the silence between them was heavy with unspoken fears. They went through the motions of their daily routine, tending the small garden they'd managed to start with the river water, reinforcing the walls, preparing their simple meal. But Evelyn could see Luke's mind was elsewhere, calculating distances and dangers. That night, she found him sitting outside, cleaning the old rifle they'd found in the lean-to. The moon was new, leaving only starlight to see by. "You're thinking of leaving," she said, not a question. His hands never paused in their work. "Crane's not interested in you. If you go, they'll say you abandoned me. I'll be right back in Blackwood's courthouse, and this time, he won't give me a choice." She sat beside him on the rough bench he'd built. "Besides, you promised, together or not at all." "That was before." "Before what? Before we kissed by the river? Before you told me about Sarah?" Her voice sharpened. "Before I started to—" She bit off the words, but they hung in the air anyway. Started to care, started to hope, started to love. "Evelyn." He set the rifle aside, turned to face her. "Crane's the best there is. He's found men in places God himself couldn't locate. And when he finds them, then we'll face him together. You don't understand. The man's a ghost. No family, no connections, no conscience. All he cares about is the money. And Blackwood's made sure there's plenty of that." She caught his hands, stilled their restless movement. "Then tell me, help me understand. Have you dealt with him before?" Luke's jaw tightened. "Once. Up in Colorado. He was tracking a man named William Bonney, not the famous one. Different fellow, bank robber. I was between situations, camping in the mountains. Bonney stumbled into my camp, bullet in his shoulder, begging for help." "You helped him?" "I was going to turn him away. Then I saw Crane's handiwork. The bullet was placed just so painful but not fatal. Crane likes them alive when he can manage it. Easier to transport, he says." Luke's voice was distant, lost in memory. "I patched Bonney up, gave him my horse. Crane tracked him to my camp 2 days later." "What happened?" "He was polite as a preacher, asked his questions, thanked me for my time. Then he shot me in the leg and left me there. Said it was a lesson about interfering with his business." Luke's hand went unconsciously to his left thigh. Took me 3 days to crawl to the nearest town. Nearly lost the leg to infection. Evelyn felt cold despite the warm night. But Bonnie got away. For a while. Crane caught him a month later in Denver. Brought him in draped over a saddle. The poster said dead or alive, and dead was easier. They sat in silence, digesting this. Then Evelyn stood, decision crystallizing in her mind. Come inside. I want to show you something. In their makeshift home, she knelt by her corner and pried up a loose floorboard. From the hiding place beneath, she pulled out a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. My father's, she explained. I saved it from the house before they locked me out. Look at this. She opened to a page covered in her father's careful script. Luke leaned close, reading by lamplight. It was a record of land transactions, names and dates and amounts. But what caught his attention were the notes in the margins: deceased, missing, found shot, 23 families in 2 years. Evelyn said, all homesteaders on land the railroad wanted, all dead or driven off within months of refusing to sell. Luke whistled low. Your father was building a case. And look here. She turned to another page. Payment authorizations from Blackwood's private account. To men like Crane, hired killers. Every one. This is evidence of conspiracy. Murder for hire. Luke looked at her with new respect. Why didn't you show this to Dixon? Because Dixon's a good man in an impossible position. If I give this to him, he has to act on it. And then he's dead too. She closed the journal carefully. Father was gathering more evidence, waiting for the federal marshals to arrive. But he died first. You think Blackwood had him killed? I know he did. The question is how to prove it. She met his gaze. And now Blackwood sent Crane after you, after us. Luke stood, paced the small space. This changes things. If we could get this journal to the right people, we'd need to survive long enough to do it. Evelyn returned the journal to its hiding place. Which brings us back to Crane. No. Luke's voice was firm. It brings us to Blackwood. Crane's just a weapon. Take away the hand that wields it. You're talking about going after a territorial judge. I'm talking about justice. He stopped pacing, faced her. Your father died trying to expose him. Sarah and Emma died because men like Blackwood value money over lives. How many more have to die? The passion in his voice made her chest tight. This was the man beneath the survivor's shell, someone who'd once believed in right and wrong enough to speak up, to fight back, someone who'd paid terrible prices for that belief but hadn't quite let it die. What are you proposing? We turn the tables. Instead of waiting for Crane to find us, we find proof of Blackwood's crimes. Real proof. Not just your father's notes. Something that would hold up in federal court. That's suicide. We'd have to go back to Dustwater, search his office, his home. Not we, me. Luke's expression was resolute. You stay here, keep up appearances. I'll slip into town, see what I can find. Absolutely not. Evelyn stood, faced him down. We've had this discussion, together or not at all. This is different. How? How is this different? Her voice rose. Because now you care what happens to me, because now it matters if I'm left alone. He caught her shoulders, gentle but firm. Because now I have something to lose. Don't you understand? For 2 years I've been a dead man walking. Nothing mattered because nothing could hurt me anymore. But you. What about me? You make me want to live. The words seemed torn from him. Not just survive, live. And that terrifies me more than Crane ever could. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In that unsteady light, Evelyn saw past Luke's defenses to the man he might have been, could still be if the world hadn't broken him so thoroughly. Then live, she said simply. With me, we'll face Crane, expose Blackwood, clear your name, Together. And if we fail, if Crane finds us first, she reached up, touched his face. Then we'll have lived, really lived. That's more than either of us had 3 months ago. He leaned into her touch, eyes closing. You're going to be the death of me, woman. Other way around, according to the town gossips? That surprised a laugh from him, short but genuine. Then he sobered. We'll need a plan. Crane's probably already in the territory, asking questions, following trails. We have maybe a week before he narrows it down to us. Then we'd better make it count. Evelyn moved to the stove, put coffee on to boil. It would be a long night of planning. Tell me everything you know about Blackwood's operations, and everything you remember about Crane's methods. They talked until dawn, mapping strategies and contingencies. Luke sketched the layout of Blackwood's office from his time in custody there. Evelyn contributed her knowledge of the town's routines. When buildings were empty, which people could be trusted a precious few. There's a man, she said finally. Samuel Henley. He clerks for Blackwood but drinks at the Red Dog every Friday night. Drinks too much, usually. And he was sweet on me before. Before you married a killer. Luke's voice was wry. Before I chose my own path. She refilled their coffee cups. If I could get him talking. Too dangerous. Blackwood would hear about it within hours. Not if we're clever about it. A plan was forming in her mind. What if I went to town for supplies perfectly normal? We need things. And if I happen to encounter Samuel? Luke was already shaking his head. Absolutely not. You said we need information. This is how we get it. I said I'd go. You're a condemned man who's supposed to be locked on this homestead. I'm a respectable married woman shopping for flour. She smiled grimly. Which one draws less attention? He had no answer for that, and they both knew it. As the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, they finalized their dangerous plan. Evelyn would go to town, gather information, perhaps even search Blackwood's office if the opportunity arose. Luke would prepare defenses here, in case Crane arrived sooner than expected. I don't like it, Luke said for the dozenth time as Evelyn prepared to leave. You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me. She checked the small derringer he'd insisted she carry, hidden in her boot. I'll be back before dark. He caught her arm as she turned to go. Evelyn, be careful, please. I will. She rose on her toes, kissed him quickly. Don't do anything heroic while I'm gone. Same to you. She walked away before she could change her mind, before the fear could overwhelm determination. Behind her, Luke stood watching until she disappeared over the ridge. Then he went inside and began preparing for war. Because war was coming. Josiah Crane was out there somewhere, following their trail with inexorable patience. And Judge Blackwood sat in dust water like a spider in his web, pulling strings that left men dead and families destroyed. But now they had weapons of their own truth, determination, and something neither Luke nor Evelyn had expected to find in this desolate place, each other. It might not be enough to win, but it was enough to fight for. The game had changed. Now they just had to survive long enough to play it out. The first shot came at dawn, shattering the window Luke had just repaired the day before. He rolled from his bedroll, reaching for the rifle as glass scattered across the floor. Evelyn, get down! But even as he shouted, he remembered she hadn't returned from town yesterday. His chest tightened with a fear sharper than any bullet. Morning, Callahan. The voice drifted from outside, calm as Sunday prayer. Fine day for settling accounts. Luke knew that voice. Josiah Crane had found them faster than expected, moving in a crouch. Luke peered through the broken window. He counted 6 men fanned out in a semicircle, taking cover behind rocks and scrub brush. Crane himself stood bold as brass in the open, duster coat moving in the morning breeze. Where's the woman? Crane called. Pretty little thing, from what I hear. Judge's daughter playing house with a killer. Luke's mind raced. Evelyn should have been back hours ago. Either something had delayed her in town, or he pushed away the darker possibilities. He had to buy time, had to survive until he knew what had happened to her. "She's not here," Luke called back. "Left me 2 days ago. Decided she preferred civilization to condemned men." Crane laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Now that's disappointing. Here I was hoping for a reunion. She's quite the topic of conversation in town, especially after what happened yesterday." Ice formed in Luke's veins. "What happened yesterday?" "Oh, you don't know." Crane sounded genuinely amused. "Your little wife tried to break into Blackwood's office. Got caught red-handed by the man himself. Last I heard, she was enjoying the hospitality of the Dustwater jail." The world tilted. Evelyn captured. Luke forced himself to breathe, to think past the roar of blood in his ears. If Crane was here for him, maybe that meant Evelyn was safe for now. "Doesn't matter," Luke managed. "I'm the one with the bounty. Take me in. Collect your money." "See, that's where it gets complicated." Crane took a step closer. "Blackwood's changed the terms. Seems he wants you both now. Something about conspiracy, theft of documents. The price on your wife's head is almost as pretty as she is." Luke's finger found the trigger. "She's got nothing to do with this." "Funny thing about marriage," Crane mused. "Makes two people into one in the eyes of the law. Her crimes are yours are hers. Very romantic, really." A movement to the left caught Luke's eye, one of Crane's men trying to flank the house. Luke shifted position, knowing he was outmanned and outgunned. The cabin was a death trap, but leaving it meant certain capture. "Tell you what," Crane continued. "You come out peaceful-like, and I'll make sure the little lady gets a clean end. Quick drop, short stop. Better than what Blackwood's got planned." "Go to hell." "Been there. Pay wasn't worth the trouble." Crane's voice hardened. "Last chance. Callahan, easy or hard, you're coming with me." Luke's answer was a shot that took off the hat of the man trying to creep along the wall. Instantly, the morning exploded with gunfire. Bullets tore through the thin walls, showering splinters. Luke moved constantly, firing through different windows, trying to seem like more than one man. The ammunition wouldn't last long. He'd counted on having Evelyn here, on defending together. Now, alone, the math was simple and brutal. A burning bottle crashed through the window oil and flames spreading across the dry floorboards. Luke grabbed the water bucket, doused the fire, but another followed. Then another. Smoke began to fill the cabin. "Smoking you out. Callahan." Crane's voice carried over the gunfire. "Rather take you alive, but dead pays the same." Luke's eyes stung from smoke, his throat burning. Through a gap in the wall, he saw riders approaching from the east. His heart sank more of Crane's men. Then he recognized the lead rider's posture, the determined set of her shoulders despite her hands being tied. Evelyn. They'd brought her here to watch him die. "Luke," her voice carried across the morning air. "Luke, I'm sorry I tried—" Touching, Crane interrupted. The condemned lovers, together at the end, almost brings a tear to my eye. Rage gave Luke clarity. They wanted a show, wanted to break him by threatening her, but that also meant they needed her alive for now. It gave him something to work with. "Crane," Luke called out. "Let's settle this like men, you and me. Winner takes all." The gunfire ceased. In the sudden quiet, Luke could hear the crackle of flames eating at the cabin walls. "Now, why would I do that?" Crane sounded genuinely curious. "I've got numbers, position, and time on my side." "Because you're proud," Luke said, moving to where he could see Evelyn more clearly. One of Crane's men held her horse's reins, a gun pointed casually her way. "Best tracker in the territories, they say. But can you take a man in a fair fight, or do you only win when the odds are stacked?" "You trying to hurt my feelings?" "Callahan, I'm trying to give you a story worth telling. Josiah Crane tracked down the notorious Luke Callahan and took him in single combat. Sounds better than Crane needed 6 men to burn out 1 wounded cowboy. Doesn't it? Silence stretched. Luke watched Evelyn, saw her scanning the scene, that sharp mind working despite her circumstances. She caught his eye, glanced deliberately at the man holding her reins, then back at Luke. A message there, if he could read it. You know what? Crane stepped into full view. You've got a point. Been a while since I had a proper challenge. No guns, Luke said quickly. Knives, close work. Otherwise your men might get nervous. Start shooting. Crane laughed, genuinely delighted. Oh, I like you. Callahan. Shame I have to kill you. He unbuckled his gun belt, drew a wicked-looking blade. Boys, anybody shoots, I'll gut them myself. This is between me and him. Luke emerged from the burning cabin, smoke billowing behind him. He'd tucked a knife in his boot days ago. Evelyn's insistence. Now he drew it, the weight familiar in his hand. Luke, no. Evelyn struggled against her bonds. Please. It's all right, he told her, not taking his eyes off Crane. Just another dance. They circled each other in the morning light. Crane moved like a predator, all coiled muscle and patient death. Luke had seen men like him in the war, natural killers who found joy in the work. Your wife tried to steal from Blackwood, Crane said conversationally, testing with a quick feint. Broke into his office, pretty as you please. Would have gotten away with it, too, if Tom Garrett hadn't spotted her. Luke filed that away, Tom Garrett, the rejected suitor, of course. Found some interesting papers in her possession. Crane continued. Your father-in-law's journal, full of accusations, theories. Blackwood wasn't pleased. They came together in a clash of steel. Crane was fast, snake-quick, his blade seeking the gaps in Luke's defense. But Luke had learned knife work in harder schools than this. He gave ground, let Crane commit, then countered with brutal efficiency. First blood went to Luke, a slash across Crane's ribs that stained his shirt red. The bounty hunter's eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with respect. Not bad for a condemned man, Crane panted. Not bad for a tracker playing at killer. Luke returned. They engaged again, more cautiously now. Around them, Crane's men watched with professional interest. The burning cabin crackled and groaned, ready to collapse. That's when Evelyn made her move. While everyone watched the knife fight, she'd worked at her bonds. Ladies' finishing school had taught her many things, including how to slip out of poorly tied knots. The moment she was free, she drove her boot heel into her guard's instep, grabbed his gun as he doubled over, and put 3 shots into the air. The shots spooked the horses. Chaos erupted as men tried to control their mounts. In the confusion, Luke struck not at Crane, but diving for Evelyn. He caught her around the waist, rolling them both behind a boulder as bullets filled the air where they'd been. Together or not at all, she gasped, pressing the stolen revolver into his hand. Woman, you're going to be the death of me. Other way around, remember? Crane's voice rose over the gunfire. Enough, ceasefire! When quiet returned, he called out, Well played, Mrs. Callahan, but you've only delayed the inevitable. Luke checked the revolver, 3 shots left. Not enough, but Evelyn was digging in her boot, producing the derringer he'd given her. I also lifted this, she whispered, pulling papers from inside her shirt. Not Father's journal, they took that, but shipping manifests from Blackwood's office. Proof he's been taking bribes from the railroad. You wonderful, insane woman. Luke kissed her quickly. Can you ride? Better than you. When I say run, we go for the horses. Don't stop, whatever happens. Luke. Promise me. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. They both knew the odds. Crane, Luke called out. You want us, come and get us. He rose up firing, the revolver barking in his hand. Evelyn was right beside him. the derringer spitting its small but effective fury. They moved as one, covering each other, a desperate dance toward the scattered horses. Luke felt the bullet hit a punch to his side that spun him around. He kept moving, kept firing. Another shot creased his thigh. But there Evelyn had reached a horse, was mounted, reaching for him. "Go!" he shouted, slapping the horse's rump. "Not without you." He grabbed the saddle horn, hauled himself up behind her through sheer will. They rode hard, bullets singing past, the burning cabin falling away behind. But Crane's men were mounting up, giving chase, and Luke could feel blood soaking his shirt, weakness creeping in. They'd never make it to town, never outrun pursuit. "The canyon," Evelyn said, understanding their chances. "Ghost Canyon. We can lose them in the rocks." It was a slim hope. Ghost Canyon was a maze of stone, full of dead ends and hidden dangers. But it was better than open desert. They rode like the wind itself, Evelyn sure in the saddle, Luke holding on with fading strength. Behind them, dust clouds marked their pursuers. Ahead, the canyon opened like a mouthful of broken teeth. "Stay with me," Evelyn pleaded as they plunged into the shadows between stone walls. "Luke, stay with me." "Always," he mumbled into her hair. "Always." The canyon swallowed them, echoes of hoofbeats bouncing off ancient rock, somewhere behind. Crane followed with deadly patience, but for now, for this moment, they were alive and together. The rest would have to wait for another dawn if they lived to see it. Ghost Canyon had earned its name from the winds that moaned through its twisted passages like souls in torment. Now, hidden in a shallow cave barely large enough for 2 people and a horse, Evelyn pressed her hand against Luke's side, trying to stem the bleeding. "Hold still," she whispered, though he'd barely moved in the past hour. His skin was pale beneath its sun-weathered tan, his breathing shallow. "You should have left me," he murmured, not for the first time. "And you should stop talking nonsense." She tore another strip from her petticoat, adding it to the makeshift bandages. The bullet had passed through his side, which was good, but the blood loss was bad, very bad. Outside their hiding spot, she could hear Crane's men searching. Their voices echoed off the canyon walls, sometimes seeming right on top of them, sometimes distant as thunder. The horse stood quiet, trained by Luke to silence even before their flight. "The papers," Luke said suddenly, trying to sit up. "Did you—" "They're safe." She pushed him back down gently. "Rest now. Save your strength." For what dying slower? But he settled back, his hand finding hers. "Tell me what you found. Might as well know what we're dying for." Evelyn pulled the folded documents from inside her shirt, stained now with sweat and blood, but still readable. "Shipping manifests, like I said. But look at the cargo listings, agricultural supplies. They claim, except farmers don't need that much gunpowder, or that many rifles." Luke's eyes sharpened despite his weakness. "He's arming someone." "The White Mountain Company. Ever heard of them? Mining outfit. They've been trying to push the Apache off their lands for years." Understanding dawned in his gray eyes. Dear God, he's planning a massacre. Blame it on Apache raids. Use it as excuse to call in the army. Clear the land for the railroad. Evelyn's voice was bitter. "Just like Skeleton Ridge, only bigger this time. There's a date on the last manifest 2 weeks from now." "We have to stop it." "We have to survive first." She checked his bandages again. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. "Luke, I need to get to town. Find Marshal Dixon. Show him these papers." "Not Dixon. He's a good man, but he's one man. You need the territorial governor, maybe even federal marshals." Luke gripped her hand tighter. "There's a telegraph office in Fort Huachuca, 2 days' ride south." "I'm not leaving you." "You have to. Those Apache families, women, children, they'll all die if you don't." A sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps on stone. Getting closer. Evelyn reached for the derringer, knowing its 2 remaining shots wouldn't be nearly enough. "Checked that cave already," a voice said, not Crane, one of his men. "Check it again," another replied. "Crane says they're here somewhere. Wounded men don't just vanish." The footsteps came closer. Evelyn raised the gun, positioning herself between Luke and the cave entrance. This was it. Then, their last stand in a hole in the rock, like animals run to ground. The shadow of a man fell across the cave mouth. He started to lean in. "Riders coming," someone shouted from farther up the canyon. "Lots of them." The shadow withdrew. Evelyn heard running feet, confused shouts, then gunfire, but not directed at them. A battle had erupted in the canyon, echoes making it impossible to tell numbers or positions. "What's happening?" Luke whispered. Before Evelyn could answer, a familiar voice called out, "Mrs. Callahan, Luke, are you in there?" Marshall Dixon. Evelyn could hardly believe it. "We're here, Luke's hurt." Dixon appeared at the cave entrance, badge glinting in the filtered sunlight. Behind him, she glimpsed other men, a full posse by the looks of it. "Thank the Lord," Dixon said. "When I found your cabin burned, I feared the worst. Then Tom Garrett started bragging in the saloon about catching you in Blackwood's office. I figured Crane would make his move." "How did you find us?" "Followed the blood trail. Luke taught me that trick years ago, actually." Dixon knelt beside Luke, checking his wounds with experienced hands. "We need to get him to a doctor. Can you ride?" "I'll manage," Luke said through gritted teeth. They moved quickly, Dixon's men forming a protective circle as they helped Luke onto a horse. Evelyn caught glimpses of the Battle Crane's men pinned down in a box canyon, outnumbered now and taking heavy casualties. "Crane?" she asked. "Slipped away like the snake he is," Dixon said grimly. "But we'll worry about him later. Right now, we need to get you both somewhere safe." "Fort Huachuca," Luke said. "The papers, Evelyn found the governor needs to see them." Dixon's expression darkened as Evelyn showed him the manifests. "Sweet Jesus, a planned massacre." 2 weeks, Evelyn confirmed. "Maybe less now." "Then we ride hard." Dixon helped steady Luke in the saddle. "Jenkins, take 6 men and keep Crane's boys pinned down. The rest of us make for the fort." They rode through the afternoon and into the night, stopping only to rest the horses and check Luke's wounds. He drifted in and out of consciousness, maintained in the saddle only by Evelyn riding double with him, her arms keeping him upright. "Stay with me," she whispered over and over, a prayer and a command. "You promised, always, you said—" "Trying," he mumbled into her hair. "You make it difficult to die." "Good. Keep finding it difficult." By dawn, Fort Huachuca's walls rose before them like salvation. The fort's doctor, a competent man named Silas Brandt, took one look at Luke and started barking orders. Within minutes, Luke was on a surgical table. Evelyn banished to the waiting room despite her protests. Dixon stayed with her as she paced, her dress stiff with dried blood, her hair wild from the ride. "He's tough," the marshal offered. "Seen him survive worse." "When?" "Years back, before his family. Luke and I rode together sometimes, tracking rustlers. Good man. What happened to him, it wasn't right." "None of this is right." Evelyn stopped pacing, faced him. "Dixon, these papers prove Blackwood's been planning murders, taking bribes. Will it be enough? With your father's journal as supporting evidence, maybe you do still have it?" Her face fell. "They took it when they arrested me. Then we'll have to get it back." Dixon's expression was grim but determined. "One way or another, we'll see justice done. Your father deserves that. Luke deserves that. Hell, we all do." Colonel William Crawford, the fort's commander, was a career soldier with keen eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He listened to Evelyn's story, examined the papers, and immediately sent telegrams to the territorial capital and Washington. If this is true, and I believe it is, we're looking at conspiracy that goes to the highest levels, he said. Judge Blackwood has powerful friends. This won't be easy. When has anything been easy? Evelyn was beyond exhaustion, running on determination alone. Colonel, those Apache families don't even know they're targeted. Someone has to warn them. I'll send riders immediately. We have good relations with several bands in the area. Crawford studied her with something like admiration. You're Theodore Monroe's daughter. All right, he'd be proud. He'd be alive if he'd been less proud and more careful. Perhaps, but then Blackwood would still be planning his massacre with no one the wiser. The colonel stood. Get some rest. Mrs. Callahan, your husband's going to need you when he wakes up. If he wakes up, the unspoken words hung in the air. Evelyn found a chair beside Luke's bed and refused to move. Doctor, Brant had done what he could, removed bullet fragments, cleaned and stitched the wounds, fought the infection already taking hold. Now it was up to Luke. He lay still as death, only the slight rise and fall of his chest showing life remained. Evelyn held his hand, noting how his calloused fingers dwarfed her own. Hands that had killed. Yes, but also hands that had built their pathetic shelter, tended their garden, touched her face with impossible gentleness. I need you to live, she told him quietly. Not just for the case, not for justice, for me, for us. We were supposed to figure it out together. Remember, one day at a time. No response. She hadn't expected one, but she kept talking anyway, telling him about the colonel's response, the search for Crane, the plans to stop the massacre, anything to fill the silence, to make herself believe he could hear her. On the second night, his fever broke. He opened his eyes, focused on her face with effort. Still here. Where else would I be? Relief made her voice sharp. You nearly died. Again. Sorry, I'll try to schedule it better next time. His attempt at a smile became a grimace of pain. The papers. Safe. The Army's moving to stop the attack. Crawford sent word to the Apache bands. She squeezed his hand. We did it. Luke, we stopped them. You did it. I just bled on things. We did it, she insisted. Together. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what happens now when I'm healed? It was the question she'd been avoiding. The immediate danger was past, but Luke was still a condemned man. Their forced marriage remained, but the reason for it. I don't know, she admitted. Crawford's telegrams might change things. If we can prove Blackwood's corruption, maybe your case gets reviewed. Maybe's a dangerous word. Luke turned his face away. You should get an annulment. Go back to your life. My life. Anger flared hot and sudden. My life is here, with you. Or did the past months mean nothing? They meant everything. His voice was raw. That's why you need to leave. I'm poison. Remember everything I touch. She cut him off with a kiss, careful of his injuries but fierce in intent. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise. Stop trying to save me from you, she said. I'm perfectly capable of saving myself. Or hadn't you noticed? I noticed. His hand came up to touch her face. Evelyn. No noble sacrifices. No pushing me away from my own good. We're past that. She settled back in her chair but kept hold of his hand. Rest now. Heal. We'll face whatever comes next the way we've faced everything else. Together. Together. He slept then, and she kept watch. Outside, she could hear the fort coming alive with activity troops preparing to prevent a massacre. Justice finally stirring from its long sleep. It wasn't over. Blackwood remained free. Crane was still out there, and the price on their heads hadn't been lifted. But for now, in this small room with dawn light creeping through the windows, they were alive. They were together. And sometimes, Evelyn was learning. That was victory enough. The war wasn't won, but this battle was theirs. And tomorrow, when Luke was stronger, they would plan the next one. Together or not at all, it had become more than a promise. It had become their truth. The federal marshals arrived at Fort Huachuca like cavalry from a dime novel. 6 hard men with badges and purpose. Their leader, Marcus Webb, had eyes like flint and a voice that brooked no argument. "Mrs. Callahan," he said after reviewing the evidence, "your testimony will be crucial, but testifying against Judge Blackwood means putting yourself in considerable danger." "I've been in danger since my father died," Evelyn replied. "At least now it serves a purpose." Luke stood beside her, still pale from his wounds but steady on his feet. 2 weeks of recovery had given him back his strength, if not his certainty about the future. "She doesn't testify without protection." "Of course." Webb's gaze swept over them both. "Mr. Callahan, there's also the matter of your own conviction. Given what we've learned about Blackwood's corruption, the prosecutor's office is willing to review your case." Hope flickered in Luke's chest, quickly suppressed. He'd learned not to trust hope, and until then. "You remain in federal custody, both of you, for your protection. You understand?" They understood, trading one form of captivity for another. But this one might lead to freedom, real freedom, not just the illusion of it. The journey back to Dustwater took 3 days, their escort of federal marshals and soldiers making it clear this was no ordinary transport. Word had already spread Judge Blackwood was under investigation, his allies scattering like roaches when the lamp is lit. They found the town transformed. Where once Blackwood's word had been law, now uncertainty reigned. Some citizens, emboldened by the federal presence, began speaking up about injustices they'd witnessed. Others, complicit in the corruption, slunk away to whatever holes would hide them. The courthouse had been secured by Marshal Webb's men. In Blackwood's office, they found more evidence ledgers detailing bribes, correspondence with the railroad companies, and most damning of all, Theodore Monroe's journal. "He kept it," Evelyn breathed, holding her father's familiar handwriting. "Like a trophy." "Arrogant men often do," Webb observed. "It will help hang him." But Blackwood himself had vanished. Some said he'd fled to Mexico. Others whispered he was hiding with powerful friends back east. Luke had his own theory. "He's nearby," he told Webb. "Man like Blackwood doesn't run. He schemes. He'll try to destroy the evidence, eliminate witnesses." "Let him try." Webb's smile was cold. "I've got men on every road, telegraph operators watching for coded messages. He'll surface." Luke wasn't so sure. Men like Blackwood had survived by being smarter than their enemies, more ruthless. And there was still Josiah Crane to consider. The bounty hunter had disappeared like smoke after the canyon fight. The trial was set for 2 weeks hence. Evelyn threw herself into preparation, working with the federal prosecutor to build an airtight case. Luke watched her transform from the frightened woman in the courthouse to something fierce and unstoppable, justice personified in a dusty dress and determined eyes. Their nights were spent in adjacent rooms at the hotel, under guard. But the walls were thin, and they talked through them like children sharing secrets. "Are you afraid?" Luke asked one night. "Terrified," she admitted. "But not of testifying. I'm afraid of what comes after. When this is over, when justice is served, what happens to us?" He pressed his hand against the wall, imagining he could feel her warmth through the wood. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll face it together," she finished. "I know. But Luke, what if together is impossible? What if they still... Then we'll have had these months, these moments, more than I ever thought I'd have again." "That's not enough." Her voice was fierce. "I want more. I want morning coffee without fear. I want to plant those seeds that survived the storm. I want to watch you not almost die for once." Despite everything, he laughed. That's a tall order, Mrs. Callahan. I'm a demanding woman. Mr. Callahan, best get used to it. The night before the trial, Luke woke to the smell of smoke. Not the lazy smoke of a chimney fire, but the acrid bite of burning oil and wood. He was on his feet in an instant, pounding on Evelyn's door. Fire everyone out. The hotel erupted in chaos. Guests stumbled from rooms in nightclothes, coughing and confused. Luke found Evelyn already dressed. She'd fallen asleep in her clothes, too anxious to properly retire. "The evidence," she gasped. "My father's journal." "Leave it!" But she was already running back to her room. Luke cursed and followed. The smoke was thicker on the second floor. Through the haze, Luke saw him, Josiah Crane, setting fire to the prosecutor's room where the evidence was stored. "Should have stayed in your room, Callahan," Crane said conversationally, drawing his gun. Luke moved on instinct, tackling Evelyn aside as Crane's shot splintered the door frame. They rolled together. Luke's hand finding the pistol Webb had reluctantly allowed him to keep. "Get the journal," he shouted, returning fire. "I'll handle Crane." The two men exchanged shots in the burning hallway, smoke and flame making accuracy difficult. Luke heard Evelyn coughing, saw her emerge with an armload of documents, her father's journal clutched tight. "The window," he ordered. "Jump." "Not without... now." Crane's bullet caught Luke in the shoulder, spinning him around, but it also gave him a clear shot. He took it, watching Crane stumble back, clutch his chest, and fall into the flames he'd set. Luke staggered to the window where Evelyn waited, her face a mask of terror and determination. "Together," she said. They jumped, landing hard in the water trough below. Federal marshals were already forming bucket brigades, fighting the flames. Webb appeared, helping them to safety. "Crane," he asked. "Dead." Luke pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder. Blackwood's last card, played and lost. Not quite his last. They turned to see Judge Blackwood himself, standing in the street with a shotgun leveled at them. His usually immaculate suit was travel-stained, his face gaunt with days of hiding. "You destroyed everything," he said, voice shaking with rage. "My life's work, my legacy." "Your legacy is death," Evelyn interrupted, stepping forward despite the gun. "My father, those homesteaders, the massacre you planned. How many, Blackwood, how many lives for your 30 pieces of silver? Your father was a fool standing in the way of progress, of civilization itself." The shotgun wavered. "The railroad will unite this country, bring prosperity, built on graves," Luke said quietly. He'd positioned himself slightly ahead of Evelyn, ready to take the blast if it came. "I know about building on graves. Blackwood, it doesn't last." "Drop the weapon." Webb and his men had Blackwood surrounded, rifles trained. "It's over. Judge." For a moment, the street held its breath. The hotel burned behind them, casting wild shadows. Blackwood's finger tightened on the trigger, and Evelyn moved, not away, but toward him, her father's journal held high. "This is what you killed him for, paper and ink, words of truth you couldn't stand to have spoken." "Evelyn, no!" Luke lunged for her. The shotgun roared, but Blackwood, in his rage and exhaustion, had aimed high. The blast went over their heads, and then Webb's men were on him, bearing him down into the dust of the street he'd once ruled. Luke caught Evelyn, pulled her against him, felt her trembling. "You magnificent, insane woman! What were you thinking?" "I was thinking," she said into his chest, "that I was tired of men with guns deciding who lives and dies. I was thinking my father deserved better. I was thinking..." She looked up at him. "I was thinking I couldn't lose you. Not now, not when we're so close." The trial lasted one day, with Crane dead and Blackwood broken, with evidence overwhelming and witnesses finally free to speak. Justice came swift and sure. Blackwood was convicted of conspiracy, murder, and corruption. He would hang the same fate he'd arranged for so many others. But the surprise came when prosecutor addressed Luke's case. In light of new evidence showing Calvin Marsh's criminal enterprises and his threats against the defendant's family, and considering the corrupt nature of the original trial, the territory moves to vacate Lucas Callahan's conviction. Just like that, with words dry as desert air, Luke was free. They stood on the courthouse steps afterward, blinking in the afternoon sun. The same steps where they'd been forced together 5 months ago. Now they stood by choice, hands clasped, facing an uncertain but possible future. "So," Evelyn said, "what now?" Luke considered. "Well, we've got a homestead to rebuild, seeds to plant, a life to figure out. Together. If you'll have me, really have me, not just because a corrupt judge said so." She turned to face him fully. "Luke Callahan, are you proposing—" "I'm suggesting," he said carefully, "that we already jumped off a burning building together. Marriage seems tame by comparison. Romantic as always." But she was smiling, that fierce, bright smile that had carried him through darkness. Yes, to all of it. The homestead, the seeds, the life. Together or not at all. He kissed her there on the courthouse steps. In full view of the town. Let them gossip. Let them tell stories. The truth was stranger and stronger than any fiction they could create. They returned to the homestead the next week, escorted by Marshal Dixon and several volunteers from town people who remembered Theodore Monroe's kindness, who were grateful for the corruption's end. The cabin was ashes, but the well remained. The land endured. And in Evelyn's careful hands, those seeds that had survived storm and fire finally found soil. "It'll take work," Luke said, surveying the damage. "Everything worth having does." Evelyn took his hand. "But I've got help." As the sun set over the desert, painting the mountains purple and gold, they stood by the river that had started it all. The water was low but running, carrying its eternal message of persistence, of life finding a way. The virgin's eyes met his by the river. Evelyn murmured, remembering the old saying. Her heart surrendered when his hands did too. "Terrible title for our story," Luke observed. "Too flowery." "What would you call it?" He thought for a moment. "Two Fools Learn to Live. A Desert Romance." "Accurate," she laughed, "if not poetic." They worked until stars claimed the sky, planning and dreaming in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were free, together, and alive. In the desert, in the darkness that had once seemed so threatening, they'd found their light. The ghost of Sarah and Emma would always shadow Luke's heart, just as Theodore Monroe's absence would always ache in Evelyn's. But ghosts could coexist with hope. Loss could make room for love. And sometimes, in the vast spaces between heartbeats, broken people could build something whole. The coyotes sang their night song, and the desert listened. And if it approved of these two souls who'd chosen each other against all odds, it kept its own counsel. Some stories, after all, were still being written. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope you enjoyed following Evelyn and Luke's journey from that fateful day in the courthouse to their hard-won freedom. Where are you listening to this story from? Please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with fellow lovers of Western romance. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more tales of love, danger, and redemption in the American frontier. Don't forget to hit the like button and press that hype button to help more people discover these stories of the Old West. Until next time, partners.